Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here with my next Avatar comic video. This one is going to be me giving my speculation, predictions, and I suppose theories about what I think will happen in North and South Part 2. Straight away, preview pages for Part 2 are still not out yet, and I haven't got a review copy, so I am purely basing everything that I'm saying in this video on just my thoughts, having reread Part 1 and being hugely invested and excited for this series. So, let's kind of jump straight in with the obvious point. How North and South Part 1 ends. The big cliffhanger of Sokka and Katara walking in to find their father Hakoda kissing Malina, and kind of confirmation of that kind of relationship. And the initial reaction we get here is shock from both of them, but once that initial kind of like, oh, this is what we're seeing right now goes away, what is the actual emotion going to be from the two characters? And I think the obvious way to interpret it, given what's happened in this book, and especially with Katara, the way the book starts with the kind of dream about her mother, I think we are expecting Katara to be very upset about this, that she will probably have the most intense reaction to this, whether that be being very upset about seeing her father potentially moving on, asking the question of like, what about mom, what about Kaya, her potentially being upset at Malina being the person that he's kissing because of her interactions with Malina previously, where she's seen Malina maybe be a bit dismissive of the southern culture, and obviously Katara is very worried about where the north, what the north is doing to the south here, and kind of seeing in this moment potentially the reason that Malina is kind of making a lot of this happen, because she kind of has this control over Hakoda because of their romantic relationship, and maybe this will further kind of Katara's dislike of Malina, and that will create a further rift between like those characters, and will further highlight Katara's issues with the Northerners and what they're doing to the South. With Sokka, it's hard to judge because they haven't done really anything with him in North and South. That he's just been okay with everything, and that's been okay. That's been fine that he's accepting of everything, because that's his character. He likes technology, he likes advancement, he's not too set in his ways about those sort of things. But I do think they should maybe try and do something with his reaction to this, where maybe Sokka is potentially the first one to bring up their mother, kind of have to like think about, this is their father finally moving on. And maybe he'll come to terms with it quickly, but maybe his initial reaction will be like, what about mom, or something like that. I hope, I suppose this is more of a general thought, but I do really hope they do something with Sokka in North and South, because it feels very Katara focused right now, and that's fine. I love Katara as a character. It's just, we're Water Tribe focused, and we're still not really doing anything with Sokka. It's a little bit kind of frustrating to see that, but hopefully they'll find something to do here, in that obviously we know in terms of roles in the South that Sokka eventually takes on very important roles for the South. Initially as the United Republic representative for the South, and then later on becoming chief of the South. So him beginning to have like a role in the village, and I think even in Part 1 they kind of start to present that Malina, I think, offers Sokka a job doing something or other. I can't remember the exact details of what she says, but she definitely offers Sokka like a job doing something or other, and that kind of smooths things over with Sokka, that he's kind of accepting of Malina because of kind of everything going on with that, and it's kind of all working out that way. So yeah, how about consulting with our crew while you're here? So it's just a kind of consulting thing that he could do, so that's interesting enough. But yeah, like going back to the cliffhanger, it's definitely going to be interesting, because I do think the Kaya will be referenced, in that ultimately they will need to, at some point, whether it be Part 2 or Part 3, have, I think, Katara talk to either, maybe it's to Sokka about their feelings about this away from their father, or maybe it's a one-on-one between Hakoda and Katara. But there needs to be a kind of heart-to-heart about Kaya and, you know, how Katara comes to accept that it is okay for their father to move on after Kaya, that he'll never forget her and they'll never forget her, but that it's okay what's happening here. She may not be like have to be super happy about it happening, but that it's okay. And I think part of that might be Aang arriving to really help Katara at a moment when it sort of feels to her like everything's kind of falling apart. She's returned home and very little has gone right. Like the whole Gilak thing is happening. They were nearly kidnapped. The South is changing and she doesn't like it. And even in part 1, she kind of wishes Aang was here. So I think after this reaction, it's one of those things where like Aang arriving and potentially being like someone to calm Katara down, give her some clarity, or just add some stability to stuff that she doesn't really have control over right now is going to be a really interesting thing. And it's going to lead to, I think, in part 2, their relationship being quite important, because one of the things part 1 emphasized was a couple of references from characters to Aang, mainly Gilak mentioning the whole idea of, look at the air nomads. They were the most egalitarian of all, and they've been wiped off the face of the earth. And you see Katara's reaction on that panel. He's speaking, but it's Katara in the visual of that panel. And how ultimately in the future, Katara's, future is going to be tied to Aang and the air nomads. That she is going to be crucial in terms of bringing the air nomads back and that culture. And maybe talking to Aang is going to confirm or help her with the whole idea of the fact that, look, Katara has helped Aang accept the fact that the air nomads may be gone, but he can bring the culture back in a different way with the air acolytes and teaching them in a kind of more modern way. He can have that culture return. And she's kind of, I think, made a bit more of an effort to be more accepting of the fact that his culture is important as well. And now I think it's the turn for Aang to kind of return the favor to Katara and maybe help her, and kind of maybe him be the one to say to her, like, if our future is together, you're not going to be just 100% tied to the water tribe. That if we have kids and stuff like that, they could be airbenders. Like that, the air nomad is going to be a pretty important aspect of that. I'm an air avatar. It's going to be important, like, where are we going to live? I don't know if they'll go that far into it. Maybe that's conversations for the future when they're older, but I think they're going to have to at least start to touch on that. At the very least, the whole idea of their relationship being one that kind of represents the merging of nations together. In that, fundamentally what's happening is that this is the North coming down to the South to help them out, maybe overexerting themselves, but with Katara and Aang's relationship, it is still water tribe and air nomad kind of coming together, and like, how does their relationship work with their culture? And I think they might reference the fact that maybe Katara hasn't made maybe as much of an effort to get to know Aang's culture, whereas maybe we'll see a lot of Aang's opinions on the water tribe culture, and that, does he see the South as kind of a home, given that, like, he obviously spent 100 years in ice kind of trapped there, and also the fact that this is where the journey started, and it's where his girlfriend lives. Does he in any way see the South as a kind of home? And that's going to be very interesting to see, just where Aang where he lies on the issue of what's happening here. I think Aang is going to kind of have a pretty solid view on this. I think he's going to kind of clearly see that, okay, fundamentally a lot of good is being done by the North being here in the South to help rebuild it, but they're maybe taking things a bit too far. And I think he'll help give that kind of clarity of just that it's maybe not as bad as Gilak and Katara think, but it's not perfect. That maybe Hakoda's giving a little bit too much into the Northerners in this, and they're not keeping enough of the South alive. In the same way that Aang, while he's obviously changing things to be more modern and some of the traditions are okay with being changed, it still has to be fundamentally airbender stuff to keep it somewhat original to what it was. So I think that's going to be a pretty important thing going forward, just the idea of like culture and the theme from stuff like the Rift and a little bit of the promise of, in more modern times, do you stick to traditions or just go with the new modern stuff? I think that's stuff like that's going to be very, very telling as we kind of go forward. Another thing would be the kind of, let me just find his name again. I keep forgetting. Thawd, Gilak's second in command of the rebels, the southern kind of patriots, I suppose. He gives a very interesting story. He tells Katara and Sokka this interesting story. He says, "Once upon a time, a snow rat learned to talk and walk on his hind feet. The humans found him entertaining, and so they invited him to sit at their campfire. After a while, the snow rat forgot that he was a snow rat at all. He asked for a home for himself and a fishing boat and a place on the tribal council. But humans never forgot that he was a snow rat. They were insulted by his requests, so they chased him away, back into the cold, where he forever shivered and gnashed his teeth, haunted by the memories of the humans' campfire." What's that have to do with anything? This is clearly referencing the fact that I think, like a lot of these books have tended to do, part 2 or 3 is going to, I think, delve very carefully into the history of the North and South. That we are going to get the full details on, I assume, how the South formed from the North and the reason for why that happened. And it's probably going to be something along the lines of like this story, that the snow rat represents the Southerners and the humans represent the Northerners, and the snow rats, the Southerners, not wanting all of the traditions of the North, but still wanting to be treated kind of equally, and the humans seeing maybe some of this as they consider uncivilized, so don't give them that treatment and maybe chase them away. Like, as far as we know, the story is quite simple. It's just that people from the North disagreed with the kind of overzealous traditions of the North, separated away, formed the South, and that's it. It's very basic for a quite important plot point in the kind of universe lore, but I think that's what they're getting at here, that to some extent, the formation of the South and what it is and what it represents is going to be an important thing, and so that story may come out. If they don't go down the history route, I still think there is something very thematic to what Thawd is saying there with regards to the way Gilak's Southerners kind of see themselves, and that they very much, I think that the North kind of is oppressing the South because the South is uncivilized. Whereas I think characters like Malina and Malik to some extent are kind of very much coming from that idea where like they come from a place where they're not used to the kind of more wild kind of style of the Southerners, where they're more in touch with nature. The cities aren't as big and they prefer having law and order and all of this stuff, whereas the Southerners prefer the kind of more simpler lifestyle, even though it maybe comes across as being less civilized. So I think stuff like that is going to be very important. As for Malina and Malik, obviously a lot of speculation revolves around the fact of like, are they good, bad, what's really here? In that, like, there's multiple ways you can interpret this. In that, like, one, Malina is either like just in this position where Katara dislikes her because she makes some, remarks that maybe she doesn't necessarily mean too much of, but kind of come across as her being against the South. And I suppose my initial impression is right now is kind of that I don't think Malina is like evil or anything like that. I think that she just honestly is trying to, in her mind, improve the South, but it's coming across like we need to turn the South into the North to make it better, and is maybe saying the wrong things, and that's why she's kind of rubbing off the wrong way on Katara. Whereas I think she actually has kind of good intentions. Malik, I could see them, if there is some sort of big villain reveal, I could see them maybe going down the road of Malik being the one who truly kind of feels bad. In that, like, it seems like he's the designer of the two, the whole idea of the plans and them being stolen, and like they haven't really fully opened them, and that like we think it's the plans for the Water Tribe Palace, but there's something more to it maybe. I think maybe that there's plans in from his side maybe to make some harsher changes than maybe Malina would like, and maybe he's going to do it behind their back to maybe help get Malina into some sort of a better position and kind of do something that way. I don't really know. I don't think they've presented enough of either character just yet. Again, it's only part 1 to really make a full decision that way. But the way I'm leaning right now is that it is going to be the case that Malina is good and Malik is either going to be just similarly in a similar position to Malina, or else he will be the one who's actually kind of on the kind of bad side of this situation. Because if it does turn out that Malina is kind of evil or something like that, like she's doing it for like ulterior motives, I just think it kind of creates an overly dramatic situation for Katara in that because I think the core of this book is going to be more about Katara dealing with how she feels about the South changing, and if she should be okay with all change, or if she's right in thinking that it's changed too much. And so giving her the kind of justification for like, no, like this woman has changed stuff because she's kind of evil and manipulating things, kind of takes away some of the complexities of that arc. Whereas I think if Malina does just honestly turn out to be a good person, maybe slightly misintentioned or something like that, it actually adds to Katara's character arc in that Malina is fundamentally a very, very nice person. And what does it say about Katara that she kind of hates this person for basically doing very little wrong? And that it kind of may highlight this whole idea of like, if Katara really sees Gilak go overly extreme, and she continues her dislike of Malina, maybe to anger or something like that, that it could create a situation where she really just has this moment of like, I do not want to be like Gilak. Like, what's going on here? And I think potentially characters like Sokka, maybe Hakoda talking to her, Aang, will be the characters to really help her gain clarity, gain an extra like insight into really what's going on here, and kind of fully kind of get in touch with how she kind of really feels about what's going on here. So I think there's a lot of complex stuff that they need to do, and I like that. I think if there's one thing you can definitely say Gene Yang does in these comics, is that he presents a character arc really interestingly, in that you have an idea about where they're going to take it, but you don't know exactly what way they're going to take it. In that, like, as I said, I expect the reaction to the whole Malina kiss to be Katara, the more instantly emotional, Sokka maybe initially shocked but accepts it, but they could go down the other road, where maybe Katara just immediately like runs off. We don't really get to see much of her reaction apart from the fact that she ran off, and it's more Sokka's reaction, and maybe he's actually quite upset about it. And then the other aspect of the book is Toph. She's on the cover for part 2. That doesn't confirm she's going to be in the book, but I think it more or less means that Toph will be in part 2, will make an appearance, because the description does mention it, that it's for the Earth and Fire refinery, making some sort of a deal with the South, and I suppose the Northerners will take over in that sense. Now, what exactly is this going to mean? In that, I assume it's going to be something along the lines of some sort of an environmental plot, where like the South is relatively untapped in terms of its resources, and the Earth and Fire refinery might have information about the fact that there's actually really good stuff in the southern tundras and stuff like that if they want to mine it, and that's why Toph is there to negotiate a deal. And I think the key thing here will be to potentially do something more with Toph and Katara's relationship, in that they're the two members of the group who tend to like argue the most, and that like we have had episodes like the Chase and the Runaway where they've been at odds with each other. Maybe they'll go down the road of having them be at odds again, in that like in the Rift it was Aang and Toph at odds with each other over kind of tradition and like the best way to do things, and in the end they had to have a compromise between like Aang maybe being overly traditional, Toph being too willing to move into the future, and they both compromised. I think we could get something very similar with Katara and Toph here, in the sense of like Toph maybe is now too on board with the business idea, wanting to like, no, look, if there's resources there, we have to take them, and maybe isn't kind of being overly familiar with Katara's feelings, and then Katara is maybe going to have to accept that, like, look, to make the South what it is, we need to do some sort of business, and it's okay to do this. But other than the whole business aspect, I'm really not exactly sure what they're going to do with Toph, because one of the most interesting things is obviously going to be how they actually go about like presenting Toph moving around in the South, in that it's going to be a place that's all snow, all ice, and we've seen before, Toph doesn't do well on ice. That it's probably her at her kind of most helpless. So how is she going to go about, if there's any fights, doing that way? It just seems like you're potentially putting such a powerful character in such a, kind of precarious situation here, that unless there's some sort of a thing where she's really practiced and can like really sense Earth deep below the surface or something like that, and that gives her some stability, I'm not exactly sure what way they're going to approach doing this. And that, like, it looks from the covers like Toph goes out with them to the tundras and stuff like that. So that's my only kind of like question mark with Toph, is like, okay, the business stuff, but that's just her talking. If there is any sort of action stuff, how is that going to work in the South with Toph? I suppose with Toph, it's the one aspect of the book where I'm kind of like, are they maybe going for too much? Adding a Toph plot in here as well, like, okay, you add to the whole business thing with Malina and Malik, but is it too much with also introducing Aang back into the story while also trying to do character arcs for everyone? I'm not entirely sure. Final thing I want to talk about is one of the lines that Pakku says relatively early on in the book, and that is when they meet him. He says, Katara, you ought to come visit my school. I'm trying to train up new waterbenders here in the south. I could use your help. Katara then responds by saying, you started a school, but where did you find the students? And Pakku says, well, ... That's the interesting part. Come visit me when you get the chance. Set up, absolutely. Now, there's a few ways they could take this. I think the most interesting one would be more southern waterbenders. That what was left of the Southern Water Tribe was effectively, obviously, like, some men who went out to war. The women stayed back. You have the elderly people, and you also had a lot of young children, the ones that Sokka was, training in like the early episodes. I think they're potentially going to do something where they kind of establish that, okay, like roughly 2 years have passed. These kids who are like 3, 4, maybe 5 are now, 4, 5, 6. Their bending powers would potentially have shown if they are benders. And because there's so many kids, a new next generation, it would make complete sense that there is at least 1 or 2 waterbenders among that group of younger kids, but their powers may have just not manifested during the time while Katara and Sokka were still there. I think if they really want to commit to doing something big, having this kind of side plot of Katara going to visit Pakku's school, maybe upset about what happened with her father and Malina, that whole incident, and this is the one thing that potentially gives her hope for the future of the southern tribe, that she goes to Pakku's school and sees that there are more people like herself. Waterbenders are coming back, that it's not all over, it's not going to be completely taken over by the North, that if she stays there, if she trains them in southern waterbending, she can keep southern waterbending alive. And I think that would be a really cool way to do it, where you could also, I suppose, maybe go down the road of like Pakku saying, oh yeah, and some of the female waterbenders from the north were so inspired by what you did over the course of the journey with Aang that they want to come down here to train in like combat waterbending like you. That the whole idea of women only doing healing, the men are the combat benders, is kind of been relatively like broken because of you and your influence. Something like that to give Katara this really big impact of like, this is the effect that she has had on like the both cultures, that she has had an impact on the south just like she has an impact on the north just like the north is having an impact on the south. I can see them doing that. I can see them doing either like one of those or both, in the sense of like maybe they just go for there are new young southern benders, southern waterbenders, that maybe separately or just on its own. Some of the northerners are coming down and want to learn southern bending combat style from Katara. That's why Pakku needs her help, because they maybe don't want to learn from Pakku because he only knows northern style, and they're like, oh, we heard Katara knows like all of the styles and like she's awesome. That maybe he's not getting the respect as a teacher, but the cool new waterbending master in town, Katara, is someone they want to learn from. So that could be really fun. And it would also give like Katara this really cool thing that she has, that she could be one of the tutors in this waterbending school, that gives her something to do to contribute to everything that's going on, and continue the Southern way. Or they could do both, a mix of both, that it's both Southerners and Northerners learning, but who really knows? I think that's more or less everything I want to talk about. I'd love to be able to talk more about Sokka, but they haven't really presented enough about like potentially what he's going to be doing. They mention him as being like a consultant, and the road they're maybe going down here is that if Katara is going to further and further dislike Malina for a variety of reasons, they may go down the road of kind of putting Katara and Sokka on opposing sides of the issue, and that there is actually a conflict in that sense, that as far as Sokka is concerned, Melina's fine, that she's helping, she's given him this role as consultant, and they can make cool things happen, and Sokka doesn't get why Katara is so against her, and doesn't really see the problem, whereas Katara would obviously see Sokka as like, you're just accepting everything because you like technology and all this sort of stuff. What about our past? Like, what about mom? Like, I can see something like that happening, like another moment where Katara maybe brings up their mother to Sokka, and there's a kind of emotional moment between the two. But other than that, like, I'd like to have a moment between like Hakoda and Sokka where maybe Hakoda starts to like maybe train Sokka in the ways of leadership or something like that. Hakoda, they just have that moment that kind of gives Sokka like you're the next in line to be chief, or something like that. Other than that, I'm not really sure what way they're going to take it. There's of course the whole Gilak plot, but we obviously know about the whole letter he's going to send, and it's going to be very ominous, and it's going to create this drama. But I really don't have a lot to speculate on how exactly they're going to approach doing the whole Gilak thing in part 2. It's the character arcs that I think are a little bit more easy to talk about and predict. It's the plot that's a bit like still open, because they obviously just... The way we ended part 1 was that the plot was just getting going, like, and there's not enough there to really read too much into. But yeah, that's like 25 plus minutes of discussion about what I think is going to happen in North and South part 2. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts are on some of the stuff I've mentioned here. Mainly the character arc stuff, like what way do you think Katara and Sokka will react to the Malina Hakoda kiss at the end? What way do you think they'll go about doing, Pakku's school, whatever reveal it is, whatever interesting thing is happening at that school with bending, and so on. So definitely continue to comment in below about what your expectations are for North and South Part 2. But I'll just end by saying links in the description to my Twitter and Tumblr if you want to follow me on social media. Links also in the description to my Patreon campaign and PayPal donation link if you want to help support my channel so I can make more videos, better videos. But that has been the video for today. Thanks for watching, and bye.